The morning I rode to town to meet my bride, I spilled coffee on my only clean shirt. That's how I knew it was going to be a day I'd remember. I'm not a man who gets rattled easily. I'd ridden out a drought that killed half my cattle. I'd sat with my father the night he died and didn't cry until I was back on my horse, alone on the road, far enough away that nobody could hear me. I've mended fences in January with bare hands because I forgot my gloves 2 miles back and was too stubborn to turn around. But that morning, standing in my kitchen with a brown stain spreading across my chest, I was rattled. Her name, according to the letter, was Clara. Clara Beecham, of Wichita, Kansas, 31 years old, schoolteacher, fond of gardens, not much else. She'd answered my advertisement in the Matrimonial News, a little paper out of Denver that my neighbor Hatch had shown me with a grin on his face, like he was handing me a joke. I wasn't laughing then. I'm not sure I was laughing when I sent the letter either. The thing is, I was 42 years old, and my ranch, Cedar Flat, needed a woman, not in some base, simple-minded way. It needed the kind of presence a woman brings. The cooking I could manage. The quiet. That's what I couldn't manage anymore. 3 years since my wife Ruth passed, and the quiet had gone from peaceful to something with teeth. I didn't ask for a photograph. I know how that sounds. My sister Lena, when I told her, put her hands flat on the table and looked at me like I'd told her I planned to jump off a. "Thomas," she said, "you didn't ask for a photograph." No, why on earth not? I didn't have a good answer. Still don't. I think part of me didn't want to make a decision based on that. I'd known beautiful women who were stone cold underneath it. I'd known plain women who lit up a room just by walking in. Ruth had been Ruth. And I'd loved her face after 20 years, the way you love a place you grew up in. The features didn't matter as much as I'd have thought at 22. So, no photograph. I changed my shirt to the dark blue one that still had a small hole at the collar, where a fence nail had caught it. Brushed my hair back and got in the wagon. It was a 2-hour ride into Redemption, which is what our town is called. I've always found that slightly hopeful, the name. Redemption, Colorado. Population, small enough that the postmaster knows your grandmother's maiden name. The train was due at 11:30. I arrived at 10 past and stood on the platform with my hat in my hands. I only realized I was doing when old Dale from the feed store walked past and gave me a look that said everything without saying a word. Put my hat back on my head. The train pulled in with that great hissing sigh that trains make, like they've been holding their breath the whole journey and are only now letting go. People poured out. A family with 4 children, the youngest one crying. 2 men in suits who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. A woman in a green dress who wasn't Clara, because she walked immediately to a man on the platform who swept her up. And then Clara Beecham stepped off the train. I want to tell you that I handled it gracefully. I want to say I stood there solid and unreadable, the way I'd practiced being my whole adult life. I did not. My mouth opened slightly. I know it did because I felt the dry October air hit the back of my throat. She was a big woman. Not fat. Exactly. I don't want to use that word because it doesn't capture it right, and it doesn't capture her right. She was tall. Almost as tall as me, and I'm 6'1". She was broad-shouldered and full-figured, and she was carrying a bag in each hand that would have made most men wince, and she was carrying them like they weighed nothing. She had dark brown hair that was pinned up, but coming loose on one side from the journey, and she was wearing a gray traveling dress, and she looked, if I'm being completely honest with myself, like a woman who had been a long time doing hard things and wasn't bothered by that fact. She saw me before I saw her see me, I think, because when our eyes met, she didn't flinch. She just looked at me steady and direct. And in that look was something I recognized, of a person who has already prepared themselves for disappointment and decided to show up anyway. I took 2 steps toward her. "Mrs. Beecham." "Miss Beecham," she corrected. "Not sharp. Just accurate. Not yet. Right. Yes, Thomas Cale." I put my hand out. She set one of the bags down and shook it. Her grip was firm. Her palm was calloused. She'd told me she was a school teacher, but her hands told me she did other things besides teach. There was a pause. Not an uncomfortable one, though it should have been. It was the kind of pause where two people are doing arithmetic. "Your advertisement," she said you were a quiet man. "It did. Is that still true?" "Far as I know." She nodded once, picked her bag back up and said, "Good. I've been on a train for 3 days and I'm all talked out." "Which one is your wagon?" She didn't say much on the ride out to Cedar Flat. I didn't either. I'd been worried about that, about silence feeling awkward, the way it does with strangers. But it didn't. She sat on the wagon bench beside me and watched the land open up, the way it does when you get out of town. Flat plains giving way to the foothills and the long autumn grass going gold, and she didn't feel the need to fill it. At one point, she said, "This is prettier than I expected." "What did you expect?" "Gray. Everything gray." She looked at the grass. "It's not gray." "No." "Good." That was it for about 40 minutes. When the ranch came into view, she leaned forward slightly. Cedar Flat sits in a kind of natural bowl in the land, with the mountains behind it and the creek running along the north pasture, and in the right light, it looks like something out of a painting. It was the right light that afternoon. All that gold in the mountains going purple. I watched her look at it. I don't know what I was hoping to see on her face. Approval, maybe. Or just something. Some sign that this wasn't entirely wrong. What I saw was more complicated. She looked at it the way you look at something, when you're not sure yet whether to love it, but you suspect you might. That was enough for me, then. The wedding was 3 days later. Reverend Mills performed it. Just the two of us, plus Lena as witness, and Hatch who came, because Hatch goes everywhere that might have a story attached to it. Clara wore a blue dress, a wedding dress. She hadn't brought one, which she'd told me plainly when we discussed it over supper the first night. I didn't want to presume, she'd said, and the way she said it told me something about the kind of woman she was. She wasn't going to assume things were going to be fine, just because she wanted them to be. She was a woman who'd been disappointed before, and had made her peace with the reality that wanting something doesn't make it happen. I stood at the front of that little church, and I watched her walk down the aisle alone. She had no one to walk with her, and she'd said she preferred it that way. And I remember thinking something I hadn't thought about another human being in a long time. I thought, I want to make sure nothing else disappoints her. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly. Like a decision you make in a plain room with no audience. Reverend Mills read the words. We said the right things. When he said I could kiss her, there was a moment, a split second, where I didn't know if she wanted that yet. We hadn't discussed it. There were a lot of things we hadn't discussed, because most of our conversations in those 3 days had been practical ones. About the ranch, about the chickens, about the fact that the porch step was rotted, and I kept meaning to fix it. I looked at her, and she looked at me, and she gave me the smallest nod. I kissed her. Just a brief thing. Lips were warm, and she smelled like soap and something else. Some flower I couldn't name. Hatch clapped once loudly. Lena cried, because Lena cries at everything. Clara looked at me afterward, with an expression that wasn't quite a smile, but was something adjacent to it, something that lived right next to a smile, and she said, very quietly, just for me, "Well, that part's done." I almost laughed. I don't know if I did. The first month was careful. That's the only word for it. We moved around each other carefully, funt. Like two people in a small boat, who both know that the wrong shift of weight tips the whole thing. She took over the kitchen with a quiet confidence that made me feel. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't have to think about what was going to be on the table that night. She found her way around the ranch in a week, walking the fences, meeting the horses, learning the names of things. She was good with the horses. Better than I expected. You said you were a school teacher, I said one afternoon, watching her calm my gelding Murphy, who'd been skittish since a rattlesnake encounter in August. I was, she said, not looking away from Murphy. Before that, I was my father's ranch hand. We were in Kansas. What happened to the ranch? Grasshoppers, she said. Then bank. Then not much. She said it without self-pity. Just the facts of a hard life stated plainly. I didn't ask more that day. She'd tell me what she wanted me to know when she wanted me to know it. That was something I noticed about Clara Beecham. She'd told herself a story about how much space she was allowed to take up in the world, and that story was not much. She'd shrunk herself into the rooms of her life. She asked before she used anything that was mine. She ate less than she should have. I noticed because I cooked for us on Sundays and I could see what she put on her plate. She moved through the house like a guest who wasn't sure of her welcome. It bothered me in a way I couldn't immediately name. One evening, maybe 3 weeks in, she asked if it would be all right if she planted a garden in the spring. Not a demand, not even quite a question, more like a very careful testing of something. You don't need to ask, I said. I didn't know. Clara. She looked up. I think it was the first time I'd said her name that way. Direct and even, not soft exactly, just unambiguous. This is your house, I said. The garden, the kitchen, whatever you want to make of it. I should have said that on day one, and I'm saying it now. Don't ask me for the things that are already yours. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's a kind thing to say. I mean it." "I know," she said. "That's why it's kind." She went back to her mending. I went back to the accounts. But something shifted, very slightly, the way a door shifts when a window opens somewhere and changes the pressure in the house. The thing about loneliness is that you get used to it. You forget what it felt like before, the way you forget what a full night's sleep feels like after a long run of bad ones. You start to think the numb quiet is just your natural state. I'd forgotten that the house could feel warm. Not from the fire, from the person in it. About 6 weeks after Clara arrived, I came in from a late repair on the north fence. It was November by then, dark by 5, and I was cold in a way that had gotten into my back. I came through the kitchen door, and there was lamplight and the smell of something good on the stove, and Clara was sitting at the table reading, and she glanced up at me. "You look frozen," she said. "Frozen adjacent," I said. She got up and poured me coffee without asking, and set it on the table, and sat back down with her book, and I sat across from her and drank it, and I thought, this is it. This is the thing I couldn't name that I was missing. Not the coffee. The person who handed it to me. It's the ordinary gravity of someone knowing to do it. I didn't say any of that, of course. I'm not built for speeches. But I said, "Thank you," and she said, "Murphy threw his shoe again. I saw it this morning." And that was that. But something was different. She had a hard night in December. I don't know what started it. I heard her in the night. Not crying exactly, but something like it. A restrained sound, the kind a person makes when they're very practiced at grief and trying not to make it anyone else's problem. I lay in my room for a while listening, trying to decide whether to leave her alone or not. I got up. I knocked on her door, and she went quiet and said she was fine, in a voice that meant she very much was not, and I said, "I know. I'm making tea," which was a kind of social fiction we both could use. Something to do, a reason to be in the same room. She came out. She sat at the table and she held her tea, and I sat across from her, and I waited. It took a while. "I had a son," she said finally. I didn't say anything. He was 2 when he got sick. That was 5 years ago. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the mug. I don't normally. I don't talk about it. But tonight it just. She stopped, pressed her lips together. Tonight it came up on me. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't say the things people say that aren't really for the grieving person, but for the person who doesn't know what to do with grief. I just sat there with her in it. After a while I said, "What was his name?" She looked up. I don't think she expected that question. "James," she said. "James Beecham. James Henry Beecham." And there it was. Something shifted in her face, and she held on to that full name like it was a things she was afraid of losing. He had my nose and his father's chin. And he laughed at everything. You know the way some babies just, everything is funny to them. Even when you sneeze, I nodded. His father left about a year after. She said it without bitterness, which I thought took more strength than bitterness would have required. So it was just me. A few years of that. Teaching, mostly. She looked at her hands. I answered your advertisement because I needed, not a solution. I know this isn't a solution. I just needed somewhere to be. Something real. Work. And a reason to get up and, she paused. And I thought if the man wasn't terrible, maybe the rest could come. I looked at her for a moment. Am I terrible? I asked. The smallest, most surprised laugh came out of her. Just a little one, almost involuntary. No, she said. No, you are really not terrible. All right, I said. Good. We sat there for another hour without saying much else. When she finally went back to bed, she put her hand on my shoulder for just a second as she passed. Not a lingering thing, just a brief warm pressure, and then she was gone. I sat at that table for a good while after. Spring came slow that year, the way it sometimes does, teasing at the edges of things for weeks before it commits. Clara started her garden in March. As soon as the ground softened enough, I'd cleared the space for her on the south side of the house where she'd pointed one afternoon in February. She'd designed the whole thing in a little notebook. I'd seen her working on it without mentioning. I'd seen it. She planted things that had no practical purpose. Flowers, mostly, hollyhocks along the fence. Some kind of deep violet plant she called salvia. Roses, in 3 colors. I watched her one afternoon from the porch, on my knees in the dirt, and I felt something I couldn't quite. It sat somewhere between respect and something else. She worked with such care. Like the act of growing something mattered to her in a particular way. Like she'd learned, somewhere in all that loss, that planting things was an act of defiance against the feeling that nothing lasts. I came down off the porch and crouched beside her. Do you need? I said. She looked up, surprised. There was dirt on her cheek. From the garden. From anything, I said. The fence, the soil, whatever. What do you need to make this work right? She looked at me for a moment. There was that expression again, the almost smile that lived right next to one. Better posts for the trellis, she said. The ones you put in won't hold the roses in 2 years. I'll replace them Sunday. You don't have to. Quote Clara. She stopped. I want to, I said. Just that. She nodded. She looked back at her garden, then, almost to herself, she said, You know you're very easy to be around. You seem surprised by that. A little. I stood up and went back to the porch, but I was smiling by the time I got there. The conversation happened in May. We'd been married 7 months. It had gone from careful to comfortable to something else. Some third thing I didn't, have a word for yet. She'd started leaving her boots by my boots at the door. I'd started making sure her coffee was ready before mine. Small things. The small things are the real architecture. We were sitting on the porch after supper watching the light go out of the sky, which had become a habit. Neither of us planned it. It just became what you did at Cedar Flat in the evenings. I had my coffee. She had hers. The garden was coming in beautiful. Thomas, she said. What did you think? When I stepped off that train. I didn't answer immediately. Honest, she said. I thought about it. I thought, I said slowly, that you looked like a woman who expected to be a disappointment. She was quiet. And that made me angry, I said. Which surprised me, angry. At whoever taught you to carry yourself like that. Another silence. The kind that isn't empty. I thought you'd be. She stopped, started again. I thought you'd take one look and put me back on the train. I thought about it, I said. She looked at me sharply. For about 2 seconds, I said. And then you picked your bag back up and you said, Which one is your wagon? And I thought, well, there it is. That's who she is. And I was glad. She looked back at the mountains. You asked me what I expected of this, she said. On the first night, at supper, I remember, said I expected to work hard and be treated fairly. You did. I want to revise that, she said. I waited. I didn't think. She was picking her words carefully, the way she did when something mattered to her. I didn't think I was going to like you. I hoped you'd be decent. I hoped this would be livable. I didn't account for. She stopped again, made a small frustrated sound. Not good at this part. You're doing fine, I said. I care about you, she said. Quickly, like getting it out before she thought better of it. I didn't expect to, but I do. And I thought you should know. The sky was the deep blue of just after sunset. The kind of blue that only exists for about 10 minutes and then it's gone. Clara, I said. You don't have to. I'm in love with you, I said. She stopped. I've been trying to figure out when that happened, I said. And I think it was the night you told me about James. I think I'd been heading that direction for a while. But that night, I sat at the kitchen table after you went to bed, and I realized I would do anything, to make sure you never had that kind of night alone again. I looked at her. So there it is. She was looking at me with an expression I'd never quite seen on her face before. All the armor was gone from it. Just her, just the face under the face she'd worn for years of doing hard things alone. 7 months, she said softly, and I've been thinking about my garden and my chickens and trying not to. She shook her head. I am such a fool. No, I said. Thomas. I reached over and took her hand. Just held it. She looked down at our hands and then up at me, and I leaned forward, and she met me halfway. This kiss was different from the one in the church. The church one was a beginning. This one was something that already knew what it was. When we pulled back, her eyes were bright. Not sad bright, the other kind. The kind that comes from something opening up that you thought had closed. The roses are going to be beautiful this summer, she said. Yes, they are, I said. I want to plant a tree, she said. Out by the creek, something that takes a long time, 100 years. I looked at her. A tree that's here long after us, she said. Something that doesn't know. It started with a classified advertisement, and a woman who almost didn't. Why, almost? I'd never asked. She was quiet for a moment. Because I was afraid that I was afraid, she said simply. Too big. Just too much of everything. And that you'd look at me and see all the wrong things. She looked at the garden. And then I thought, I have already spent so much of my life trying to be less. What if I just go and see? I looked at this woman. This woman who'd come off a train in October carrying 2 heavy bags, with the posture of someone waiting to be turned away, who'd learned to take up less and less space, until she'd almost made herself invisible, who had loved a little boy named James Henry and lost him, and gotten back up and kept going, had knelt in my dirt in March, and planted things that took years to bloom, because she still, after everything, believed in the future enough to bother. I thought about the morning I'd spilled coffee on my shirt and stood in my kitchen, rattled and unsure. I thought about 3 years of a quiet that had teeth. I stood up from the porch chair, and I held my hand out to her, and she took it, and when she stood up she was almost my height, and I put both arms around her, the way you hold something you mean to keep, solid and sure, and she put her face against my chest. She let out a long, slow breath, like she'd been holding it for years. You're not too much, I said, into her hair. You're exactly the right amount. She didn't say anything for a while, neither did I. The creek was running, and the mountains were going dark, and somewhere in the south pasture Murphy nickered once, then was quiet. Thomas, she said finally. I'm going to be very happy here. I tightened my arms around her. Yeah, I said. I think you are. The tree she planted by the creek was a cottonwood. She put it in the ground on a Tuesday morning in June. I dug the hole. She set the roots. We both tamped the soil down, hands side by side in the dirt. It's a small thing right now. A stick with leaves, really. In 100 years, it'll be enormous. Someone will stand under it and not know a single thing about a woman named Clara Beecham, or a man named Thomas Cale, or a classified advertisement in a little paper from Denver, a train arriving at 11:30 on an October morning, or the weight of 2 bags in strong hands, or a garden of roses in 3 colors, or a boy named James who laughed at everything. They'll just be standing in the shade. And I find I'm entirely at peace with that.